Hey, you guys, Decima here. I'm so excited to be bringing episode number 67. This week, Charlie chatted a little bit with JB about a new mentorship program that's rolling out. We're so excited about, so stick around and take a listen to that. I'm also here with Jacob tonight. He interviewed Courtney this week. How did that go, Jacob?
It was a good discussion. Courtney had a interesting experience where she wasn't really expecting withdrawal and had it for the first time and was like, oh shit, and got sober from Kratom and has been sober for a little over a month. It's an interesting one. I think you guys will enjoy it.
Nice. I can't wait to take a listen. So, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about why, when we used Kratom, it was a secret for a lot of us, why it was such a shameful secret.
Yeah, my experience was a little bit different. I didn't say anything at first because I probably knew in the back of my head it was a bad idea. And I knew if I would have told my wife, hey, I'm going to go try this new Kratom stuff that I heard about, she'd probably be like, yeah, how do you think that's going to turn out? Because of just the history of addiction that I have. But anyway, so that was one of the reasons. And then when I first was doing it for the first year and I wasn't dependent on it and hadn't really got into using daily and being a problem, I just didn't know anybody else that took it really in my life. So I didn't really have anything to talk about. So it didn't seemed like odd to bring it up. And then when I got addicted, I was just embarrassed more than anything because the first thing I read online when I went to, I think it was like our Kratom on Reddit, was like people basically saying that Kratom addiction's nothing. It's like coffee withdrawal and this or that. Because this was 4 or 5 years ago now. And that was not the experience I was having. But anyway, I think that's really why I used it a lot in secret.
So I actually remember being embarrassed about it too. I can relate to that. In the beginning, when I first started using Kratom and I thought it was a great thing, I remember using it pretty openly, like at work and stuff. And then as it progressed, I started getting more and more embarrassed about it. Now looking back, I'm humiliated to know that I did that. But it definitely became
Yeah.
more and more embarrassing as I got more addicted to it. It made me think, oh, did these people think I'm an addict taking this stuff?
I think in talking to so many people through this podcast and just in a couple meetings and stuff, I think that for a lot of people, Kratom's like your last addiction, and I think that leads to secret use too, because at some point you know that it's not good. You just you get that sense, even when it was still early days. It was like you know that something's not right here, and I think it just leads to a lot of secretive behavior. Go ahead, sorry.
No, actually, I was just going to say that another reason that people hide it a lot and I hid it was it had to do with relapsing a lot. So when Kratom did become a problem and it became an evident problem where like my husband and other people in my life could see it was a problem and I quit and then relapse, that was really hard to admit. So I actually used Kratom in secret for many years and hid it from the people I was closest to, including my husband, because of the relapsing over and over again. It was just so embarrassing. I felt like a
I
failure. And
did I
I
did
didn't
the
want to
same
upset
thing.
them. I was afraid. Yeah.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Didn't want to upset either, and it was just like once you fall off, you just man, it makes me anxious just thinking about having that conversation again.
Yeah, I'm really glad that the stigma is going away on it. I am seeing a lot more when we do still have to protect our energy and our spaces when we publicly celebrate Kratom recovery or say anything negative about Kratom, but it does
Mhm.
seem to be balancing out more. I'm seeing that people are able to say it and others are actually like, yeah, me too. That's happening to me too. So I really hope that anybody that's listening to this is if you are feeling that shame, you're not alone. We get it. Yeah, but it definitely can relate.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say when it comes to recovery is the one thing that you'll hear over and over again is you have to tell someone. So if you were listening to this and you're still in that secretive period, don't be shamed. Don't, beat yourself up about it. We're sitting here talking about how we were there, and I truly sympathize. It's not easy, but when you tell someone, you start to build accountability, and allows you to start to get on your way to recovery.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Like telling somebody, especially my husband, changed everything. So great advice, Jacob.
Thanks. Yeah.
Ow.
Another thing we wanted to mention is that starting this Wednesday, July 3rd, and running essentially through the summer, each Wednesday we're going to be bringing you guys a special episode. They will be a little bit different than our typical Sunday interview episodes, and they'll include a range of special guests. The first one will be Decima and I talking and asking each other some questions that we didn't have a chance to look at beforehand to celebrate our 1 year Kratom free. And then following that, we have a PhD scientist that's going to come on to talk a little bit about kratom use disorder. And from there, there's a whole host of interviews spanning conversations with investigative journalists, discussions with the family members of folks that have passed away from kratom, harm reduction, various other topics. So it should be a really cool summer series, and we hope you guys will check it out.
With that, I think that we could probably wrap this up and we can move on to the interview. What you think?
I think so.
Right. Well, thanks for tuning
All
in,
right.
guys. Enjoy the interview.
Welcome to the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. This is Jacob, and our guest tonight is Courtney. Courtney, how are you doing this evening?
Doing pretty good. Been sleeping a lot the past couple of nights just because of exhaustion and being old. How are you?
I'm good. I like sleep myself and can sympathize with
Yes.
getting older. Sometimes you gotta take care of the body. So, Courtney, how would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Thanks for asking. I'm Courtney. I'm really me. I was debating on whether to go by an alias or not, but I was like, I'm pretty much an open book as it is. Let's see. I am a picker at a very well-known warehouse. I'm not going to name drop them, but I'm sure everybody can guess by the verbiage I just used where that would be. Hobbies. I was just telling Jacob just a minute ago, I was a podcaster. A friend of mine and I did a true crime podcast for about 3 years. I hate to admit, but Kratom ruined that. I really love researching. I research pretty much everything just because I am evidently, I do have a husband and a sweet almost 7-year-old daughter. And yeah, that's it. That's me.
Welcome to the podcast.
Actually, it's funny because like when I'm 40, I'll be 41 in January. So that kind of gives you an idea of what year I was when I was in the first grade. That's when they tentatively diagnosed me with ADD. So they didn't really know it as ADHD back then. With all that being said, they put me on Ritalin. They put me on Adderall later whenever Ritalin kind of started getting huge backlash. But yeah, they put me on all that. And then I'd started researching different mental illnesses, one of them being autism. And I just figured out fairly early on that I don't think I have ADHD. I think I have some of the comorbidities, maybe. But my mom, even towards the end of her life, was like, you know what? I have been wondering if you're autistic. And she didn't mean it in a derogatory way. We were just been talking about it a lot. And then I found out in fall that last year that I'm autistic. I'm like, oh, high functioning. It's just crazy, but it makes sense.
Yeah, I bet it does. I learned
Thank you.
this last year. For work internally, I coincidentally recorded a podcast episode for our mental health ERG at the last job I had, and I
Yeah.
found out through the conversation I was having with the woman that was the interviewee, that women are not often diagnosed with things like autism, ADHD, and like that until they're much older than men, because the way the medical system is geared towards serving white males versus actually taking
Yeah.
care of a more robust demographic. Let's
Yeah.
get into your story a little bit here. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about how you first encountered Kratom and when you first tried some?
Sure. So my mom passed away February of last year. And thank you. It's been a whirlwind. So a little backstory before all of that, like in my 20s, I discovered things like OxyContin and then Lortabs, which is the generic form of one of those. I don't remember. But yeah, all of that. So I thought that it was fun and developed some habits. Then fast forward to 20 years, my mom passes away. She was in a lot of pain at the end. She had left me some oxycodones. So there was like 50 pills. I think that the doctors knew she was on her way. So they were like, well, she's in a lot of pain. Let's just make her happy. I
Yeah.
really think that's what that was. But I found them and I was like, wow, this is a gift from my mom to help me heal my pain.
Oh no.
Took them. Yeah, took them and ran out real fast. Asked a friend of mine if she had known anything that could help stave off the cravings, right? Because I
Mhm.
couldn't just easily get them. And she was like, well, how about Kratom? And I was like, what's that? And she explained it to me. And I was like, it's safe, it's not expensive, and it's easy to access. So I'm just going to try some. And if it works, if not, it's not going to hurt me.
Yep.
And so the first time I took their recommended dose of 6 capsules, and I was like, I don't feel shit. So I was like, I don't like this stuff, but I decided to give it another chance. So I increased it by 2 more capsules and then I felt it. And I was just pretty much hooked from about the end of, from the end of March till May of this year.
Okay. Since you brought up some of your former history with substance abuse, be it use prior, did you ever get like addicted or physically dependent on opiates before?
I would probably say diet addicted, if that makes sense. Like,
It does, yeah.
well, I had to have it, but it wasn't easy to access even back then, which is crazy to me. And I'd like to get into that. I was thinking about how that was a huge thing for a couple of years. And then they even made a TV show about it, talking about painkillers and things like that,
Yeah.
opiates. And now it's almost like we're dealing with that again with Kratom now. It's wild. Have you noticed?
That was an interesting question. So we're about the same age.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think with back in the day, in my early 20s, it was like relatively easy to get kind of drug.
Yeah.
But still, it wasn't like Kratom because one, you knew that shit was going to potentially lead you to something bad. Where Kratom, oftentimes, it's not advertised like that. It's advertised as a supplement or something much milder than a partial opiate agonist, which is what metrogenine is, which is the one of the alkaloids in Kratom. But I digress. But not really, because I think the fact that there was still that level of control, even though doctors were pretty lenient about writing a crazy amount of pills for some
Yeah.
people, and that were relatively easy to get and get parties and stuff like that in college and things and all that stuff.
Because I was wondering, because there's a lot of people that are like, Kratom's not going to hurt you. You're telling us a bunch of bullshit. And I remember people
Oh,
were so advocating opioids back then. So that's where I'm drawing the comparison.
Yeah, I guess I could see that comparison to a degree. Any other kind of substance use or anything like that in your history?
I wasn't addicted, but I did drink quite a bit.
Okay.
I tried Coke. I didn't like it. I even tried weed, and surprisingly, weed is just not, it doesn't work well with me.
Like, that's just not their thing.
It's not just that, it doesn't feel good, but I got a lot of
Okay.
anxiety on it. But yeah, there wasn't really very much substance abuse back then, but
Okay.
I guess my drug of choice
Was opiates. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry again for the loss of your mother. You end up using the leftover pain medication and you move into the Kratom, and it sounded like you were like immediately just replaced the oxy with the Kratom. How did you think about your usage at first? Did you see it as something that could be a problem, or were you like, oh, this is like, how did you progress from using it when you transitioned off the opiates to knowing that you had a problem and it was like a problem for you?
Oh my gosh. So I didn't think it was a problem the entire time. I think I knew deep down, but was in massive denial. I think hindsight tells me that I should have known that it was a problem when I was like finishing my cups of coffee. And this is gross, but I would wait until everybody left. And then I would like sneak vomit, if that makes sense. I didn't want people to see me vomiting. And I was vomiting a lot on this stuff. That's, yeah. And then I think also financially, I should have known it was an issue, being that I was spending at least like up to $100 a week on this stuff. And I was constantly thinking about it, wanting it. Like I was taking it at work. It got pretty bad, but I didn't realize it until my car died and I couldn't access it anymore.
Oh, okay. So you were, how much did you, so it sounded like you started with, I think you said 6 capsules, like assume
Yeah.
like a half gram maybe, so 3 grams. And what were you taking when your car died? And how long did that
So,
take?
oh, but
What was
so
that
when
timeline?
I started on the tonics after I was
Okay.
suggested to try. Those have their own freaking issue anyway. But I started on those, but then I was like, man, I want something stronger. So I went to the brand Valley Gold, and that one I stuck with from probably about April to this last May. Started at about 8 grams, ended at about 44.
Okay.
So not as bad as some people, but bad enough.
That's a bit, that's a pretty good tolerance increase and increase in usage for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened when your car died?
My car died. We couldn't afford to get it fixed because it turned out to be like a $2,000 fix. But I had counted out what I had left of my capsules, and I had enough for my. I took about 4 doses, or my own personal doses anyway, a day. Up until May 23rd, there was 3 doses left, and I was like, I have gone without a dose before, so I'll be okay. So I took those and then just made the jump cold turkey because I couldn't even get to the kratom. And
Okay.
when I started having withdrawals was when I realized I had a huge problem.
Okay. So how did that, what happened next as you went through the withdrawal? How long did that take? And did you go back to Kratom when you were able to get transportation sorted out? What happened?
The withdrawals were the worst. I didn't start feeling,
Okay.
I felt okay the first 24 hours, but don't forget I was working overnight. So I don't know how the hours work during the day with that. But
Mm-hmm.
so I get to work and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be fine. It's just something that I was taking a lot of. No big deal.
Yeah. Of course it'll be fine. What could go wrong?
What could happen? And so I was being trained for a specific spot that could move me up at my job. I was being trained by a manager, a very difficult assistant manager, and somebody else. Our power went out, and I have sensory issues. So when the power went out, we had to sit there for about 4 hours doing like socializing with each other, which I didn't want to do. I started realizing that things were a lot more intensified, all of the alarms and the beeping and all this stuff, everybody talking. I just wanted to be alone. And then I started feeling the anxiety hit. So it was a mixture of that and then the physical withdrawals, which not to get too into it, but just I had similar withdrawals to everybody else where I was sweating a lot. I had diarrhea real bad. That lasted almost three
Yeah.
weeks. Yeah. When I was on Kratom, I was just like a lot of other people, I was vomiting a lot and constipated. I did lose about 40 pounds. I don't know if it's because of the kratom, but I'm pretty sure it is because Jack was talking about he tried not to eat when he was taking his kratom to avoid any kind of interaction. I was doing the same thing. I wouldn't eat at all until I was done taking my 4 doses.
Yeah,
So,
I could do similar stuff.
yeah. But yeah, the withdrawals, it was about 3 weeks of that. Severe anxiety. I actually had a lot of suicidal ideation.
I did
I
too.
also,
I did too.
yeah.
I never had that with anything else before.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had it while I was on it, but I was more apathetic on it than I was off of it, if that makes sense. So
Yes. Well,
I
it
didn't
totally
care if I
does.
died. I didn't care if I died while I was on Kratom, but I did if I was having suicidal ideation and was coming off of it. So I had a lot of psychological and physical things going on during my withdrawal, and it was the worst 3 weeks of my life, but the first 2 weeks were even worse than anything else. I finally started feeling good on the 14th day. And
Okay. Did you take any stuff to help or do anything
yeah,
to try to? Okay.
yeah, I took Benadryl to help with the restless body.
I've heard you're not supposed to do that, but
Right. I didn't have any other
okay.
choice. So there's like a lot of
Okay.
people that have certain privilege so they can get the help, which is one thing I want to say to
Yeah.
get into some kind of detox if you can, but I couldn't. So I was doing a lot of my own like research of what I could do that would be next best,
I
as long
see.
as it wasn't habit forming. Yeah. So at first I couldn't sleep well. So I was taking Benadryl with melatonin to help, and that did help. I've tried ashwagandha. That's been working really well. And then passion flower, vitamin C, everybody recommended in the Facebook group, and lots of water. And of course, if I really just want to just have a moment to relax, I do take the CBD with a little bit of THC in it. So that's what I've been taking.
Okay. And so how long have you been sober from Kratom now?
It's just over a day over a month, so 32 days.
Day over a month. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I would ask you how the first 30 days of your quit went, but I think we just heard about it. So it sounds like the
Yeah,
first
I'm
3 weeks
sorry.
were
I'm talking
fine.
a
No, please don't apologize. This is great. This is perfect. Your story is interesting because I haven't talked to someone that's jumped headfirst into Kratom like you did, coming from an opiate. No, did you know a lot about it, I guess, is another question.
no,
Okay, so yeah, so you jumped right in and then you used it for, sounds like about a year, and then you
about a year
you
and
know,
2 months.
off about a year and 2 months, and then now you're just off the first time, and you didn't even recognize the problem, and now you really do. It's very interesting story.
Yeah. I don't ever want to go back to it. I will say that. Like, I've had a couple of instances where I'm like, I really want some. We were recently dealing with another addictive personality in the house. I gave you a lowdown on that one, but
Hmm.
basically it doesn't end well. I feel like maybe that was an eye opener for me. It was like, look, not only were you deep into something that seems safe at the time, that's heavily legal right now, that's easy to get to, but yeah, there's that. I gotten into this thing and I don't remember. I just lost my train of thought. I apologize.
You were talking a little bit about how, and for the listeners, you had a family member that was dealing with some addiction
Yeah.
issues that you had to ultimately get
Oh, yeah.
involved in, and I think that's where you were headed.
Yeah. So I was watching her go through that and I was like, anytime that I had wanted it, it would be like a PTSD reaction to what I had been witnessing. So it was like a wake up call from the universe, I feel. There was one time where my husband and I were putting a new bed in and we were cleaning up underneath it and I found a capsule and I stared at it for a long time until I was like, yeah, you can take this and put it down the disposal. I know that I'm going to have my moments where I'm going to really want it. And I still have the moments of the anhedonia, which they both kind of coincide, unfortunately. But I seriously don't want to go back, if that makes sense. Of course, I'm going to want it, but I don't want to go back. So
Yeah,
I,
it makes 100% sense to me. I don't want to go back either. It's one of those things where it can be it is a traumatic experience, and the more times you go
Mhm.
through it, I think the more traumatic it becomes. But so I can
Yeah,
totally sympathize with definitely not wanting to go back to that.
yeah.
In the spirit of that, what are you doing? Any recovery program? How are you planning so that you don't end up in that situation again?
So my husband and my daughter doesn't know jack about any of this, but she's still been a support. She's only 6, but my
Okay.
husband's been he's been a really good support system. My roommate's been good. I've been talking a lot to my aunt. I don't really have a lot of ways to get to recovery programs in person, but I have been trying to see if there is an AA chapter or Al-Anon chapter, sorry, that does Zoom so I could just talk to them. But right now it's just that my therapist is a good support system to help me
Yeah,
stay
therapy's great.
accountable. Yeah, and then also music. I like to listen to music a lot more, so that kind of keeps me busy, if that makes sense. But just
Yeah,
good
it
to
does.
people, really. Yeah. So
It does, yeah. There's a lot of online Kratom meetings now. I think there's pretty much one every night too. That I went
yeah,
to one the other night. It was a good experience. That hadn't been in a long
yeah.
time.
Oh,
Um,
I wanted to mention one other good support system that I am part of is I'm part of the Reddit group, but I'm also part of the Facebook group. I like the Facebook group a lot better just because you're not dealing with a bunch of trolls. Yeah.
I do too. I like when I want like more, I would say a broader opinion, and
You're cutting
sometimes a
out.
little bit better like scientific information.
Hold
I'll go
on.
to Reddit just because there's more to search. But other than that, I like the interaction with people on the book group a lot better. So, how now that you're through the withdrawals and you're moving on with life, how is your life today kratom free?
So I mentioned earlier about music. I'm going to make a huge suggestion is that it's called Nightmare by King ISO. He's part of Strange Music, or he was part of Strange Music, which I'm a huge fan of Tech Nine and all that. But that
Okay.
song, I loved that song when I was using, but I appreciated it like crazy when I came off of Kratom. Music's been great as far as like sober living. My empathy for people is back. It's not that I'd completely lost it while I was on Kratom. It was that I didn't give a shit. Nothing could phase me. But now I'm like, wow, how cold and cruel am I on that shit? It's just a lot of awakenings, and but there's something about waking up in the morning to have coffee without having to take kratom that just it just hits different. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I have a kind of a follow-up question to that. Did
Sure.
you have like emotions and anger with kratom? I had like emotions and anger over like the stupidest shit.
Yeah, I wouldn't say emotions. It was weird because I went from like Jekyll to Hyde on this shit.
Yeah, I did that too.
So I'm a very deeply empathetic person. So that does, I get anxiety because of it, because like I can read people's vibes sometimes. It's not that I'm psychic or anything, it's just that I know how people are feeling. So when I was using Kratom, I didn't give a fuck. Pardon my language, but that's just how it was. Like something stupid would bother me and I would be vengeful, cruel, and mean about it for weeks. But I wouldn't be angry. I would just be dull about it and monotonous. And I don't know how to explain it. But no, the emotions weren't really amplified about anything until after I quit. That's pretty much the best I could say.
Yeah, it's that numbness that it like gives you after a while. You just become numb to
Yeah.
most things in life.
And looking back on it, it doesn't, it just looks, it's scary to see. If I were to see outside of myself, that's not who I am. So I think that being off of Kratom, just as short of a time, amount of time as I've been off of Kratom, I still think that it's been an eye opening for me. And in an emotional way, it was like I came through the withdrawals. Now I just got to fight the cravings. But also, I don't want to be that version of me ever again.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's a, I don't know. It was sometimes hard for me to wasn't sometimes it was always hard for me to love myself when I was
Yeah.
in the depths of any sort of addiction because I
Yeah.
always felt like I could be a better version of myself if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kratom on it's just this weird like drug because hardly anybody knows about it and
Right.
a lot of the people that do think it's like pretty benign or in the same category as something as like marijuana and
It's
I
not,
don't know.
though.
It's just not yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's basic. It's I don't know. It's like
Once upon a time, poppies were perfectly fine, right?
yeah.
And it's so innocent and harmless. No, it's not. Like anything, really anything can be harmful if taken in excess. And I agree with that statement. But
Of
don't
course.
agree with, what I don't agree with is how people are treating this drug that I'm coming to find out after the fact has actually killed people by itself. And there's people fighting against people that are advocating for those that have died off of this stuff.
Courtney, what is your top tip for someone who is getting ready to quit kratom?
Dude, if you can go to a detox program, do it, because I understand that recovery is not linear, but please at least try to cut down the withdrawal time, because mine lasted almost 3 weeks with that being really intense at 2. If you want to, if you're so afraid of withdrawals, you're going to have to go through it anyway, but just make the jump, go get on detox if you can, and make sure it's medically assisted, because that will help so much. I wish I had done that.
Yeah, it's a really good tip. I really didn't want to get help, but I am so glad that I eventually did because
Yeah.
it was what I needed to do. There's no shame in that, and if you can do it, I think it's a great thing to do.
Sure.
So, if money was no object and you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and why?
Canada. I know that sounds so boring, but it's Okay, I'm gonna save the rest of my money for something really cool, but I do want to go somewhere outside of the US. So I'm gonna go to Canada where it's almost more likely to be cold than it is where I'm at. So yeah, I know I'm boring.
Because I've been to Canada, to Toronto and Montreal, and I had a lot of fun in both places.
Yeah, it just looks like it would have a lot of real cool like scenery, and there's a lot of history to it. So that would be one, but also it's just cheaper to go to Canada from here than it is to go to and I know you said money's no object, but what
Yeah,
if I want to use the rest of that money to set my family up real good?
yeah,
Maybe.
no, good point. You got to make priority decisions, so I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the show Trailer Park Boys, and they filmed that in Canada.
Hell yeah, my husband loves them.
It's just
Who is that
stupid.
guy with the Coke bottle glasses with the cat? What's his name?
Bubbles. His
Okay,
name's Bubbles.
that's basically my husband.
Oh, you're married to Bubbles. I hope you guys aren't living in a shed.
No, no.
But if you are, that's cool. Nothing wrong with that. Anybody who's listening, living in a shed, I'm all good with it. I think that's a fun
Yeah,
thing to be doing.
we would be still wealthy with happiness and love for each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, before we wrap up tonight, is there a question I didn't ask you that you want to talk about, or any other topics you want to get into, or question?
I think we've covered everything. I just think that there's other things to do than take kratom if you can. That's pretty much all.
It's a great philosophy. There are many other better things that you can do with your time than take kratom and sit around and watch the same YouTube video over again.
Yeah, and lose your ability to want to eat anything and for your high to wear off after 10 to 15 minutes. So,
Yeah, and for your life to fall apart because you're constantly chasing that 15-minute high.
oh, and your wallet to be very tiny.
Yep, especially when you get into extracts, which,
Yeah.
if you want to chase that high, is a high distinct possibility, I believe.
Yeah.
Courtney, thank you so much. I hope
Thank
you
you.
have a wonderful night, and it's been great talking to you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
All right.
Kratom in the headlines. Hey everyone, this is Jacob, and this week on Kratom in the headlines, we have it's kind of a short documentary. It's about 30 minutes long. It's called Exotic Plants, Deadly Consequences, The Feel Free Story, and this is by a gentleman named Scott Carney, who has an investigative podcast and does some investigative journalism. So he tells the story of the popular plant-based kratom kava tonic Feel Free. His caption essentially for the video is, chances are you've never heard of Feel Free, but I bet most of you have if you are on this podcast or listening to this podcast. It's sold at convenience stores, smoke shops across the country. It proclaims it's primarily kava, but until recently, it was less forthright about its much more powerful other ingredient, kratom. And there's been a lot of guests and others on the podcast that have talked about that. A few years ago, he mentions he started seeing signs for kratom at his local head shop. He started doing his research that since 2016, the FDA has been ineffectively trying to schedule or regulate kratom, and there's a powerful lobby that has used essentially a familiar playbook to keep it. He notes that the kratom industry as a whole is worth about 1.5 billion today, and he notes the investigative series the Tampa Bay Times did back in December that went real deep into the kratom industry and touched a little bit on potential kratom addiction and some of the deaths that have happened. And he says, while kratom is having its heyday in the press, the various health elixirs based off of kratom, this particular product, are getting a lot less attention in the traditional media sources. He only became aware of Feel Free once people started sliding into his DMs from a Reddit board called Quitting Feel Free. So shout out to our listeners that are constantly contributing and helping people in that forum. You guys are killing it. Basically, he didn't know about the issues or anything like that. He said one woman whose daughter died essentially with feel-free bottles, the blue bottles around here called it Evil Incarnate. And he talks about Botanic Tonics and the company that created the product and sells the product. So it's a little bit longer than some of the media and articles we typically share at around a little over 30 minutes, but it's a really interesting story. It's got some crazy twists and turns and some pseudo controversial stuff. The founder and owner of Feel Three's parent company, Botanic Tonics, has a wild story and it gets into all of that. So I won't spoil it for you, give you any spoilers or teasers. You're going to have to watch it and learn a little bit more about Feel Free and the creator and the crazy story behind it through the essentially short documentary. So check that out if you have some time. It was really interesting. I learned a lot and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done and really interesting piece. So that's Kratom in the headlines for this week. Keep it Kratom free.
Hello, welcome to Resource of the Week, and I am joined by JB, who many of you might have remembered from, I think about a month and a half ago. He was on for an episode and talked about his quitting journey, or you might have ran into him on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock at the Dopey Kratom Zoom meeting. How you doing, JB?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
And we're going to talk about a new resource that the different various meetings are coming together to start to offer Kratom, and it's a mentoring program. Could you tell us about this, JB?
Sure. It's something that you see in a lot of other recovery programs. And with the community growing at the rate it is and the amount of new people that were showing up week to week, just in the Dopey meeting, but also in the other meetings that we work in coordination with, it felt like the right time to roll out a mentor-mentee pairing up relationship program. It's a one-on-one mentorship relationship that can help someone new in their recovery journey stay focused, reach their goals, and prevent relapse, obviously. I truly believe additional accountability from a friendly voice who cares about you and is in your best interest, is always in your best interest. It's a good thing. It's a great tool to have in your recovery journey.
Great. And yeah, the most kind of infamous or well-known kind of relationship like that is a sponsor, the 12-step model. How is this different than the sponsorship approach?
Yeah, it is indeed different. And to my knowledge, KA or Kratom Anonymous does offer a sponsorship model, but this is a little different. I would say it's a little bit more casual. It's really a different type of relationship. The sponsorship is often focused on getting someone through the 12 steps, helping them with their inventories, etc. And this doesn't have to be that, right? It can be if the mentor and mentee are on that same page, but this is really much more a dialogue about the mentee's needs and how the mentor can help them achieve their goals, whatever it may be, obviously quitting, but whatever and however, not just by means of stepping through the 12 steps, which is a great way to keep structure, and it totally makes sense. But this is an alternative approach for people who don't necessarily do the 12 step.
All right. But what are the qualifications to be a mentor?
Yeah, this is a new thing. So we're just taking a shot at the dark. I worked specifically on this with Decima, your co-host, and her and I were just like, this feels right. Let's try this and we'll tweak it along the way. So right now in this like kind of pre-release stage, we floated a couple meetings. We've got a couple people signed up, but it's still early. Right now, the requirements are for a mentor, 6 months sobriety from Kratom, a strong desire to help someone else on their journey, maturity and readiness to help someone else who's desperately in need. And I'm just a big believer in you are your own barometer. I'm not going to give you some sort of quiz to tell you if you're a good mentor or not, but you should know whether you're at that right stage or not. And if you have doubt, you're not there. I would say it's as simple as that. No other outside addictions, obviously. You need to have some time to devote every week to your mentee. It can be over text, it can be over call. Again, that's between you and the individual that you're paired up with. We will pair you up with someone. That's it.
Excellent.
Right now.
Yes, we're starting something. It's an experiment. There'll be some learning as you're building the plane. I hate that analogy, but we'll go with it. And how do people sign up for this?
Yeah, right now we just have a simple sign up form. You can get it if you come to any of our meetings. There are meetings every day now at this point between Dopey and between the stuff that There Is a Way Out, what Decima's doing, and quitting Kratom, whatever group. If you go to any of those weekly meetings that are all on kratommeetings.com, this form will be available to you. It'll be part of the announcements. Otherwise, you can ask me or you can ask Decima, and we can get it to you directly. We'll probably get it on the Kratom meetings site. We should do that, actually. If we could put that on the Kratom meeting site to this or something, then they could get it that way too. But right now, go to a meeting, and that's how you get to sign up. Yeah.
And you can always contact the show at kratomsobriety@gmail.com or our socials, and I can point you in the right direction. So thanks a lot for coming up. Was there anything that you'd like to say? Anything else you'd like to say about this that I didn't ask about?
No, I don't. I'm excited to do this. I think this will be a fun experiment. I think it'll be a fun way to bring the community together in new ways. I see it. It's sad, but we see the growth. We see the amount of people that are joining us each and every week, and it's sad and it's good. It's obviously a good thing that people are trying to find help, but man, there's a lot of people who need help out there. I'm just psyched to bring this as a different sort of tool that you can have in your recovery utility belt. And I hope it provides much needed help to people along the way. That's all.
Yeah, I found quitting Kratom to be very lonely. So lonely, I started a whole podcast for it. So hopefully this is another way you don't have to do it alone and you can have support along the way. Before we leave, I wanted to congratulate you, JB. I think last week you celebrated a year, and this weekend our buddy Dave is going to be celebrating a year.
Dave is my Dopey meeting co-host, great friend to both of us, and super psyched for him to hit his 1 year. It was definitely felt really empowering to hit my 1 year. Yeah, it's an exciting moment, and I hope every listener to this podcast who's going through the same thing right now gets the chance to experience this too.
Yeah, well, congratulations to JB and Dave on a year, and until next week, keep it Kratom free.
Bye, everyone.